Hey, Pam. Pamela. Pamela.
Hi, Ben. Hi, Renee.
Thanks for joining us, Pamela.
Students working on their storyboards today.
How's the project coming with them?
Oh, they're having a lot of fun. They've decided they're doing 3 items of misinformation. One is propaganda, one's a deep fake, and one has to do with health. And they're writing their little 1-minute vignettes. And each one has like a takeaway lesson. So, yeah.
Wow.
That's great. When you are done with the semester, I know it's a crazy time, but I would love to touch base with you
Sure.
about how the projects went with your students and kind of get your feedback.
My only concern at this point is the whole vertical video thing, which we said we could talk about. They're probably going to produce it horizontal. So we'll just submit it that way. And, for disqualified, oh, well, I mean, they're still enjoying themselves. So,
That's something that we could take into consideration when creating it. We could end up removing that stipulation. So
yeah.
I've been staring at and Renee, you got my confirmation that we can do the workshop. Okay, awesome. My team was so excited. So
awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna put the promotional stuff together over the weekend.
I could be a daughter, but I come back to the water no matter how hard I try. Every time.
We're gonna start in 3 minutes.
I better get a pen and pencil, or pencil and pen.
Hey, Anthony, thanks for joining.
Hold me down. Keep me close. Safe and sound. Burning in a hopeless dream. I'm to sleep. Keep me in the warmth of your love when you depart. Keep me safe, safe and sound. Lift me up. Hold down. Keep me close. Safe and sound. Try me. Take keep me in the strength of your arms.
Hey, Bob, how are you? How's Costa Rica?
Just arrived yesterday, so still
He's in paradise.
Yeah.
You are so lucky. You are so lucky. Well, it's sunny and warm. It's getting darker and darker here every minute.
Yeah, it's sunshine 12 hours a day, every day.
We're going to start in about 2 more minutes.
So Renee, I taught extremism today, just in case the
Oh.
FBI comes after me for all of my searches.
Hey. Who's coming into this party? That's me. And my friend Ben. Hey, Bob. Hey, Pamela. Errolyn, my friend Errolyn, you're also joining us. Welcome, everybody. This is the Media Education Lab webinar. We're talking about media literacy, youth media, and bridge building. We've been thrilled to reach more than 700 people with the Courageous Conversations. Now we're in the thick of working with 58 teachers from across the country, across Rhode Island, and even some international teachers in the Courageous Professional Development Program. And pretty soon we're going to be launching the Youth Media Contest. And that's why we wanted to talk a little bit about the powerful role that youth media can play in building bridges. My collaborator at the Courageous Rhode Island is Professor Ben Thevenin, and we wanted to invite Ben to talk about this topic in a way that would help us make the connection between the building of community through media creative expression activities and the kind of continuing turmoil that we are experiencing as we're seeing so much political division globally, locally, and the way in which students can build some skills and build some knowledge and get inspired through media creative expression activities. So I think everybody here knows Ben, but Ben has written a great book called Making Media Literacy Matter: Critical Literacy, Popular Culture, and
creative production.
That's it. That's it. And one of the things I love about this book is the way in which he weaves together those three elements. So you are really feeling the organic connection between making media, analyzing media, and sort of reflecting on your place in the universe, really, your place as an engaged citizen. He's program manager for the Youth Media Contest at Courageous Rhode Island. He's also a professor at Brigham Young University. And Ben, take it away, my friend.
Thanks so much, Renee. I want to thank you guys for attending and for this opportunity to be a part of the Media Education Lab and Courageous Rhode Island's efforts to talk about these important subjects. We're going to talk about a number of things today, but before we jump in, I do want to take a second for everyone to have a little bit of an emotional check-in. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world. There's a lot of stuff going on probably in our professional and personal lives. And so something I do with my kids when I pick them up from school is I ask them about their sweets and their sours. If you feel like you'd like to, share in the chat something that's going well for you, something that you're excited about, some kind of sweet. Also, you could choose to share something that's causing you a little bit of stress, something that's troubling you, a sour. And we can just kind of make sure that we're in a good place to start the conversation today before we jump into some of the content. I'm going to share a sweet of mine is that next week is a break for me in my semester. I get to spend some time with family. Oh, Renee, that's a wonderful sweet, right? Seeing a loved one being able to be cared for that way, I can absolutely relate to that. That's a wonderful sweet.
Yeah, the clouds are clearing.
Oh,
even as it gets darker and darker.
Yeah, and that maybe that's the sour, right? Is that we're approaching winter, and we'll all need to care for each other a little bit better. I love Bob, the best empanada I've had in my life. That's what happens when you go to Costa Rica, I think. Isn't that right? That you, those are the sweets that come along with that kind of travel. Um, thank you so much. Pamela's saying sour, 5% of students who just can't get it together this semester. Isn't that tough? I was having to have this conversation with my TAs the other day. Teach one of these huge film classes that has 10 sections, 200 kids. So my TAs assisting a lot with the instruction and grading. And they said, what do we do about these students that just aren't showing up? And I said, you do the best you can, but some of them are just not going to make it through the semester. It's a tough place to be. Thanks for sharing some of these sweets and sours. I really appreciate you guys being willing to be a little bit vulnerable. That is key to some of the things we're going to be talking about today. Why don't we jump in? There's a lot of things I'd like to cover. Let's start with this quote from Ben Okri. Ben is a Nigerian novelist. He wrote a book in the late 90s called Birds of Heaven, and he makes this statement in the book about the power of story that has always stuck with me. He writes, "It's easy to forget how mysterious and mighty stories are. They do their work in silence, invisibly. They work with all the internal materials of the mind and self. They become part of you while changing you. Beware the stories you read or tell. Subtly, at night, beneath the waters of consciousness, they are altering your world. Stories are the secret reservoir of values. Change the stories individuals or nations live by and tell themselves, and you change the individuals and nations." Now, I think it's interesting that Okri here is expressing a viewpoint that on one hand might be considered really self-evident, at the same time potentially controversial, right? He's saying that stories have this incredible influence on us, on our perception of others, on our perception of ourselves. And so much so, he argues that if we change the stories that we tell, we can literally change the world. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I think our world would benefit from some changes. I think regardless of your political orientation or your nationality, your background, your personal ideology, I think that there's probably aspects of our society that you feel like need to be improved, problems you feel like we need to address. And I'm going to go out on another limb and say that it's likely that whatever specific problem you see in the world, that it's likely that you attribute at least a portion of that problem to the stories being circulated about it in the media. So, perpetuation in pop culture, or maybe it's political division and how it's being exploited in news media, or maybe it's disinformation being circulated on social media that contributes to things like, a mass misunderstanding of important issues like climate change or whatever it may be. Now, I'm gonna say that, like, I think our engagement with media and with others can be improved, specifically through using these technologies, these modes of expression, to encourage conversations that lead to mutual understanding, that in ways that recognize and celebrate both our shared humanity and also our diversity, right? And then maybe most importantly, for the purposes of this Courageous Rhode Island initiative, we can use media to prevent the hate that leads to violence. Ben Okri reminds us that stories, even and maybe especially those shared in media, that they have power and they reflect our values, that they are a part of us, that they can change us, and that they can change the world. In today's webinar, I'm going to spotlight a few examples of media that illustrate how we can use our creativity, how our students can use their creativity to build bridges. And our intention with examining these different case studies is to develop an approach to media literacy and bridge building that we can use in our classrooms and our other kind of contexts within our communities, to better prepare those around us, better prepare ourselves to creatively engage with some of the challenges that we're facing as a society. Now, go to our first example. This young man's name is Dylan Marin. In 2013, he joined the cast of a popular podcast at the time. It was called Welcome to Night Vale. It's kind of staged as like an old-timey radio show, but surreal and weird and quite popular. It got him some attention on the internet. He went on to create a popular YouTube channel called Every Single Word, in which he re-edits movies and television shows to just include the dialogue spoken by people of color as a means of, commenting on the representation of race and ethnicity in media. You can already tell, like, central to Marin's ethos as a media creator is this idea that the stories that we tell matter, that they have impact. Now, continuing to explore this theme, Dylan Marin launched a podcast in 2017 called Conversations with People Who Hate Me. So, having authored and posted a lot of content on the internet for a number of years, Marin had received more than his fair share of, negative comments, trolling, online hate. But he was convinced that behind those hateful comments, there were real people with whom, given the right circumstances, he might be able to find some common ground. Let's listen to just the excerpt of the trailer for his podcast, get a sense of his project.
Hi, is this Josh?
Yeah, it's Josh.
So, back in January, you wrote, "You are the most pathetic human being I have ever seen on the internet in my entire life." Josh, what inspired you to write that message? Hi, I'm Dylan Marin, and I'm starting a new podcast called Conversations with People Who Hate Me. It's an interview series where I get to know some of the people behind the negative and hateful messages I've received on the internet. You wrote to me, "You're a moron, you're the reason this country is dividing itself, all of your videos are merely opinion," and an awful opinion, I must say. Dylan Marin represents some of the worst aspects of liberalism. When the police aren't there, sensitive young men like you will be the first to go. Also, being gay is a chemical thing in your body, but similar to addictions that people have, it's an addiction that you can control. Good thing nobody watches your shit, but hey, you're probably getting $10 a video, so whatever. So I wanted to use this series not to shut down the people who disagree with me, but to actually talk with them. What sparked you to send that initial message?
I was just angry about it all.
I'd actually messaged a few different popular people on Facebook, but you're actually the only one that messaged back.
I was very outraged by the views you had, especially on abortion.
I had a couple cocktails in me, but let me tell you, I stand by most of what I said.
Did you think that I would read the message?
Not really.
I see this podcast as a way to take hateful jabs online and turn them into productive conversations offline.
There we go. We're back. All right. So, Renee's posting in the chat. He's engaging with trolls. This same experiment, if conducted with a different attitude, I don't know, maybe we're calling something like CNN's Crossfire, it might emphasize or even exploit the conflict in those comment sections. But Dylan is committed to this idea of using the podcast, using media storytelling to promote dialogue rather than division. We're to learn something from his approach throughout the series. Actually, the podcast ran until earlier this year. It had its final episode earlier this year. Dylan Marin models some attributes of bridge building that I think we might learn from, that our students might learn from them. First, it benefits us to have conversations in real time, right? He is using the interactions from YouTube comment sections, for example, but using those as opportunities to launch into some, if not face-to-face, right, then in real-time conversations in which a truer dialogue can happen. In these conversations, he's trying to practice active listening. A few weeks ago, I led another webinar with Renee on the intersections between active listening and media literacy. And active listening is actually one of the central movement. Something that I think distinguishes us from other media literacy movements is this role that we place on not just expressing ourselves or communicating, but also really actively listening. Next, he makes a considerable effort to seek to understand others' experiences and perspectives. So he's not there just to shut this person down or to treat them as a straw man, but really understand the context in which they're coming to these conclusions, that they're making these comments, that they're voicing these opinions. Now, for our purposes, I think it might benefit us to consider question: how might media more closely resemble a productive conversation rather than one-way communication, or alternative, right, a thread of conflicting comments? If you have a thought in response to this question, why don't you put it in the chat? We may have a chance to talk about some of the responses. I want to start with Renee and see if Renee has any thoughts while other folks are kind of putting their thoughts together and putting them in the chat. Renee, what do you think?
Yeah, Ben, this is a fascinating question. How might media more closely resemble a productive conversation rather than a one-way communication or a thread of conflicting comments? And when you shared with us this guy, and his approach, I think one thing that I sometimes do is I talk back to media texts. But I think the shift that might be more productive is for me to talk back to the author who created the media text. I think it's easy for me to, I just in the thread of discussion, I bashed the Wolf of Wall Street, right? Because it's a text that I find really problematic and troubling. But I do think it's interesting to think about responding to authors, not necessarily just focusing on the text. And then I think in a way, then that invites us to think about the context as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, is that it's one of the difficulties of engaging effectively with others online. It's so easy to forget that behind that comment, there is a human being, right? And it's easy to analyze, to deconstruct, to tear apart, right? To tear into a comment online, something that is so decontextualized as just a text and not, right, an expression of someone's self, right, of their experience. And so is there a way to kind of certainly not get rid of our critical analytical, work, but also maybe fold that into a recognition of someone else's humanity, a compassion for perspectives, even when those perspectives or experiences different from our own. I see Pamela, you writes, maybe show rather than tell, leverage the visual culture. Pamela, I think this is really interesting. Can you take a second to maybe further develop that thought for us, help us understand a little more?
Well, the first thing that my students, when they were thinking about their media product, was they didn't want it to be preachy. Guys, they didn't want to just preach at people about things. And so they wanted to show people talking and disagreeing and using techniques rather than just spouting them out. So that's kind of where that came from. I was trying to think about how to say, don't preach. How can we use other tactics? They want to show conversations between people rather than just, you should do this.
That's a good point, is that one of the ways that media might more closely resemble a productive conversation is in the media that we create, modeling conversations, right? Representing dialogue as a means of encouraging further dialogue. That's great. Bob, you're right. Clarifying questions with genuine interest, a full meal instead of sound bites. I totally agree. I think so much of some of the conflict, right, that comes out of online comment sections is that we're limited to this many words, right? That we're not encouraged to provide context, right? To go into detail, to engage with nuance. And so finding platforms that allow, right, for those things maybe isn't whatever Twitter, for example, or whatever it's being called nowadays, That's a really good point.
Bob, I love that. I just saw a meme online. I'll describe it. It looks like a tube of toothpaste, and on it, it says AI, all the hard-won knowledge and wisdom of humanity, and now in a convenient squeezable paste. So that was kind of, you were talking about, we think we can get everything in 15 seconds, but that's not telling whole stories.
And that so much of our media culture, whether it is Twitter or sound bites within the news or like TikTok videos or viral, kind of memes, right? It's been shrunk down to its kind of like the fewest words, the lowest common denominator. And sometimes, right, dialogue requires us to go beyond that, right? Like,
yeah, and even the limitations of like this contest, which is 4 minutes, right?
yeah.
Which is granted in today's attention span makes sense, but again, how much depth is there in 15 seconds, 4 minutes, whatever? So yeah, I like that. Thanks, Bob, for that inspiration and that picture in my head of snacky pizza rolls rather than, a full entree.
Exactly. These are great. I'm glad that we're already like thinking deeply about some of these questions. Let's keep these in mind as we go on to look at some subsequent examples. This next example, you guys are probably already familiar with. Ira Glass in the 90s. It was 1995 when Ira Glass launched This American Life, the radio program. This is, long before Dylan Marin's making his own podcast. Glass and his collaborators, they're celebrating this idea of using radio to listen to people's stories and to seek to understand different perspectives, different experiences, a range of human experience. I'm a longtime listener of This American Life. I've had a number of those, what do they call them, like driveway moments, right? When you're listening to the program on your drive home and you get to the driveway and you just have to sit in the car and finish out because you're listening to some compelling personal story and you don't even want to miss the moment that it's going to take you to run from the house inside, right? In 2015, This American Life aired an episode called The Incredible Rarity of Changing Your Mind. And the premise of the episode is that when dealing with things like starkly opposing political perspectives, rigidly held opinions, one thing has been proven to change minds and encourage people to find common ground more than any other. And that's personal stories shared in one-on-one, face-to-face interactions. Now, I'm going to share with you the first 5 minutes or so of this episode that I think kind of really succinctly, really beautifully, we're talking about packing a punch in a small container. This 5 minutes, I think, does this, represents, an approach to building bridges, not just changing minds, but looking for opportunities for people from varying viewpoints to come together in a productive way.
Okay, take a second right now and just think about this. When it comes to the big hot button issues, climate change and gun control and abortion rights and school vouchers and affirmative action and Obamacare. Okay, do you know anybody who has changed their minds? Who firmly was on one side of the issue and then they read a story in the New York Times or they heard something on Rush Limbaugh and now they are firmly on the other side. I'm just going to guess probably not, right? In fact, the opposite happens. There's this thing called the backfire effect. It's been documented in all kinds of studies. It shows that when we're confronted with evidence disproving what we believe, generally we just dig in and we believe it more. And the rare times that people do change, it's slow. You don't just, have an argument with your uncle over the invasion of Iraq over dinner, and then at the end of dinner, one of you goes okay, I no longer believe what I did. You're right. People just don't flip like that. Which is why this video is so incredible.
Hello.
Hello, sir.
Okay, so there are two men standing in a driveway. There's a canvasser with a clipboard, and he's talking to a California voter about gay marriage, and it's 2013. And the voter leans against his truck for a lot of the conversation. He tells the canvasser that on a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 is definitely vote for gay marriage, and 0 is definitely vote against, he's a 5.
Here's what bothers me is gays that are flaming. Flaming are the ones that are just so damn goofy and all that.
He sort of flips his wrist as he says this.
I worked with one for probably 5 or 10 years. He was my my father's wife's brother. And I didn't even know he was gay. But he was just he had 5 sisters, and I just thought he was feminine, and finally he came out and he said he was gay. When they act like that, to me, I don't care if they do it to other people, but don't do it to me, because it's just,
At the same time, this guy says he thinks it's only fair that gay people get the benefits of marriage. They can get on their partner's insurance. And he knows other people who are gay. They're perfectly nice. Even that flaming guy, perfectly nice. They're just regular people, he says. They talk for 18 minutes. And the guy with the clipboard, he's not a pollster. He's been sent out specifically to change people's minds on this issue, to try to flip them into voting for gay marriage. And so part of the conversation is just about the issue itself, like the pros and cons of gay marriage. Does the voter think it'll have a bad effect on children? What are his concerns about it? The voter explains.
The religious thing would hold me back a little bit, just because. Okay. I mean, I believe in God strongly. I believe in his ways.
But a lot of the conversation is just them talking in this totally honest way about themselves and their attitudes about homosexuality and the voters' experiences with homosexuals. The canvasser, his name is Richard Jalado, is gay himself. Not flamboyant gay, by the way. Silver hair, goatee, a contractor in the construction business. And here's just how real and free-floating this conversation is. At one point, the voter feels comfortable enough to ask him,
At what point did you realize you were gay? I mean, how does a child realize they're gay?
That's a hard. I can remember. I can think back to third grade, and I had a crush on a boy in the class.
Okay.
And it wasn't sexual. I didn't know what that was.
Right.
But I can still remember kind of what he looks like. I'm pretty sure I remember his name still, and I remember being heartbroken when he left early in the first part of the semester there.
Yeah.
And some people think that being gay is a choice. I was talking with a voter, and he was telling me he thought it was a choice, and I said my choice was to accept being gay, and because I tried to be straight. And that just wasn't working.
Well, yeah, if it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
And then at that point, the canvasser, Richard, very skillfully brings them back to the topic at hand.
So your vote has a lot of influence on how my life goes. I'm with somebody now that I'm hoping either get engaged or go have the full-out marriage. And so your vote would be very important. It would affect my life.
Your life and a lot of other people too.
That's correct. So
that's a lot to think about too, because after meeting you, you're a hell of a nice guy.
And then Richard asked the voter for a second time, okay, on a scale of 0 to 10, what's the chance that he would vote for gay marriage? The guy's answer the first time was 5. Now it's 8. Barely 14 minutes have passed.
Well, you make a really good presentation.
Well, thank you, sir. I haven't done this in a while.
Now, even more amazing than the fact that this actually worked is that it lasted. Richard was part of an army of hundreds of volunteers around Los Angeles who were sent out to change people's minds. And a study by researchers at UCLA and Columbia University found that a year later, not only did these voters stay convinced, they also convinced others in their own households to switch. Apparently, neither of those things ever happens.
All right, we'll end the excerpt there. Now, this episode continues to follow the efforts of these LGBTQ activists, canvassing California neighborhoods, and some of the remarkable changes they observe in the attitudes and behaviors of the citizens who have these like one-on-one, face-to-face, personal conversations with, specifically these queer canvassers, right? And through this episode, Glass reveals what seem to be the strengths of this approach used by those canvassing. He says, this is what they learned: to stop telling people things. That reminds me of Pamela's students being like, we don't want to come across as preachy. That they should have no roadmap for the conversation. Instead, the canvassers could talk personally about their own experiences. That seemed to help and connect with voters, but that by itself was not enough. The most important thing they could do, they had to listen. And when the voter gave a clue about something that seemed real and emotional and important to them, find out more, see where it leads. So you can already kind of see the model of this approach, right? Informing how we might promote media literacy and build a bridge building with our students. That's quote provides us with a few more characteristics of the approach that we might employ. One is like stop telling people things, right? That's something that we might benefit from learning as teachers. Our students certainly would benefit from thinking about as they express themselves creatively through their work. That we emphasize instead sharing personal experiences. That just as important to communicating or expressing what we have to say is to listening to what other people have to say, finding out more and seeing where it leads. I think all these characteristics, but especially the last one, the see where it leads, suggests that we approach these conversations, we approach, I don't know, our efforts to promote dialogue through the media that we create with a certain type of openness, a willingness to consider different perspectives than our own, to be open to new information, to experiences that we might not share. We approach these conversations with the courage to compromise, to change our own mind, to be wrong even. That's tough to do a lot of the time. In my classes, especially teaching my undergraduate media arts students, so many of them are eager to share their stories, let their voices be heard, make media as a means of this kind of personal expression. I try to help them focus on the opportunity that we have, right, as creators, but also as citizens, as educators, to practice openness and to let that value of openness inform the work that they're doing. Documentary film is one place where I think this openness is especially important. Taught a few classes on documentary, and in a work of fiction, the creator scripts a story that decide who the main character is, how the plot will progress, what message is being communicated in the end, at least to a certain degree. But in nonfiction, right, especially in documentary film where the story is being captured in real time as it unfolds, the creators benefit from approaching their subject with an open mind, right? This ethic of openness almost becomes a necessity. Let's go to our last example before we have some time to chat. A few years ago, two students of mine, Helen and Camlin, they sought out to make a short documentary on ecological crisis in Utah, where I teach. Now, to provide some context, many of you may not be aware, Utah's beautiful, has amazing landscapes, mountains to ski on, deserts to hike through and explore. It's quickly becoming one of the states with the worst air quality in the country due to a number of factors. Salt Lake City's in the top 20 highest short-term particle pollution, top 10 highest ozone pollution in the country. At the same time that Helen and Camlin were, living and breathing in, record high levels of air pollution, they were watching their fellow Utah residents fight to keep coal mines going, coal-powered energy alive. And these young filmmakers, they might have made up their mind right then and there to make a film that critiqued the state's reliance on coal mining and the coal industries and called for more sustainable energy solutions. But they were encouraged to keep an open mind. So they decided to go down and visit some of the mining towns and hear people's stories. And eventually they befriended a number of female coal miners, many of whom were struggling to make ends meet as mining jobs were being cut back and mining communities were becoming ghost towns. We're going to watch just a minute or so excerpt from their documentary, The Coal Minority, and get just a piece of the types of conversations, the types of interactions, the stories, right, that they were engaging with as they went down to these mining communities.
My name is Trudy Lund. I am a coal miner. Been doing it for 16 years now. Roof bolting was my favorite position. I loved it. It was challenging. It was fast. It was, yeah.
182 miners in Emery County are being told that they're losing their jobs. That's because PacifiCorp announced plans to shut down the Deer Creek coal mine.
Yeah, Mark and Christina, according to many of the miners out here, a big shock to them because just last week, the union miners just signed a 3-year contract deal, so they thought they were safe for at least another 3 years. Then they were pulled in yesterday afternoon and told the mine is shutting down, you're losing your jobs.
I'm laid off right now. I've been looking for work since May. Carolyn has helped me out a lot by, she paid for my gas to come back home, And
I don't let her pay for anything up there because she doesn't have the money.
Our unemployment ran out. Last week in November, no more unemployment. Nothing. All I can do now is just
Keep looking for work.
Keep looking for work. That's all you can do. I've got a pretty good resume. All you can do is just keep on going onto these places and hope that they respond to your resume.
Wow.
Now, to make media that embraces this value of openness doesn't mean that you have to sacrifice having a point of view. I mean, every story has to have a point of view, but I think it does suggest that at the center of the story that we're telling are human beings rather than an agenda, right? Through the course of the project, Helen and Camlin learned of the challenges that their subjects, Tracy among them, were facing, right? Job losses, health issues, but also the harassment and marginalization that they'd experienced being among the few women working in the mines. And actually, Helen and Camlin bonded with these women around, shared experiences with sexism in their respective fields. It turned out that, conservative-leaning middle-aged coal miners and college-age tree-hugging documentary filmmakers had more in common, right, than they initially thought. That they were brought together through some shared experiences of, in this case, like suffering, right? Now, when given the opportunity to collaborate and express themselves creatively, Helen and Camlin chose to approach their subject with openness, right? They made an effort to listen to these stories, these women's stories, and to make efforts to learn about them and to earn their trust. And through these efforts, they found some common ground. They used their film to amplify voices of those who'd been silenced, and voices that even Helen and Camlin themselves had previously misunderstood and even maligned. Now, that's not to suggest that after making the coal minority, that the filmmakers and the miners came to some perfect agreement on energy-related issues or anything like that. But I think they no longer saw each other as well, like other, right? They saw each other as members of the same community with similar struggles, similar experiences. And sharing their stories gave them a peek into each other's lives, helped them see each other as more than, a comment on a screen or an opposing opinion, but as humans. So if we were to learn from Camlin and Helen, bridge building might require us to approach dialogues with openness, to ask questions, to seek to understand others' experiences. We're getting a little bit of the same values repeated in some of these examples, to seek to find common ground and to be willing to change our minds. Now, those are the three examples I wanted to share with you today, but I want us to give us a chance to meet and to discuss some key kind of practices, potential applications that might be drawn from our conversation about media literacy and bridge building in our particular areas of influence, whether we're teachers working in classrooms or in communities. I want to give us this chance to speak as a group, I guess, because I think, Renee, is it fair to say we're a small enough group that we can just meet here and chat about these questions rather than breaking out, or is there a benefit, do you think, to breaking out? Oh, Renee, you're muted.
All right. I think there's a benefit to breaking out in two small groups, if only for 8 minutes, because these are great questions, Ben.
Great. Let's plan on doing that. The questions that I'd like to discuss in these small groups are: one, what's an obstacle that you or your community face in creating mutual understanding among opposing groups? What are you up against, right? Next, what's one effort that you could use to facilitate bridge building among those you serve, as an educator, as a media creator, as a citizen? Next, what's an example of media that you feel like promotes dialogue and openness? I've provided a couple examples, but I'm eager to hear if you have any others that come to mind. How could we use creative collaboration to foster understanding and unity, right, rather than division and conflict? What kinds of media could you and your students imagine making to try to address some of these issues? So I think that we're going to get set up with some breakout groups, and we'll have 8 minutes or so to briefly introduce ourselves and then to discuss whatever of these questions we feel like drawn to.
Oh, yes. And you know what? Guess what, Ben? Immediately as soon as we talked about having 2 breakout rooms, we lost people.
Oh no. Okay.
Obviously, so we scared them away. So I vote we are small enough now with just the 7 of us to have a 1 group. It's
All right, let's do that.
That happened, but it did.
Hey,
So.
you know, that happens. I do want to remind us, if before we jump into this conversation, a couple weeks ago we talked about media literacy and active listening, and we came up with some kind of key characteristics of active listening, things to keep in mind as we engage in conversation: to be curious, to treat people with respect, to have courage to ask important questions, listen with sensitivity, seek to understand, 2-way dialogues, right? Practice vulnerability, try to validate each other's experiences, be calm and kind, right? And focus on what we can be doing rather than focusing on just the obstacles that we're facing. I'm going to bring back the questions back up. I'd love for everyone to go around the room and briefly introduce yourself, and then we can jump into whichever of these questions you feel most drawn to. We've heard from me and Renee, but I'm curious if Pamela, do you want to go just take a minute to just give us your intro?
Hi, I'm Pamela Morris. I'm a professor in communication studies in Indiana, and I teach college students. Yeah,
that's great. Bob, are you able to take a second to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, I'm Bob Van Oosterhout. I'm a psychologist. Still do a little bit of counseling, but mostly writing, with a focus on fear and balance, 2 interest areas.
Great to meet you,
I
Bob.
live in Dexter, Michigan, but in Costa Rica till April.
That sounds lovely. Michigan to Costa Rica during the winter. It sounds like the perfect plan. Anthony, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, I too am in Michigan, but wish I was with Bob in Costa Rica. I'm here in Kalamazoo. I'm with the Public Media Network. I'm the Director of Media Education and Technology. I used to teach at a film school here in West Michigan for about 4 years. And now I'm down here at our basically our Media Access Center in Kalamazoo, Michigan, helping develop education programs and move more into a community or fostering community through media literacy, digital literacy, and teach people skills and techniques to become better storytellers.
That's
and
great.
Engage their voice to improve, hopefully, our content of the board.
That's perfect. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Good to meet you.
Thanks for having me,
Anthony. Absolutely. And then we have our trusty Media Education Lab staff member, Yamaya. Yamaya, you want to introduce yourself as well?
Hi, everyone. It's great to see you. I am Yamaya. I'm a program manager here at CRI. I'm also a program manager at a healthcare research institute out in Boston, but I'm physically located in Providence.
Thanks, Yamaya. I'm curious, among the group, which of these questions you are most interested in exploring for the next few minutes? What thoughts do you have looking at that list?
The topic that I'm avoiding is the polarization between Americans who support Palestine and those who support Israel. And it turns out that those are my people, those are my friends, but it's really, really hard to have a conversation about it because it's because we don't know who and what we can trust, and people are feeling very loyal to one team or the other, and both teams are getting really hurt.
That is, I think, an obstacle for a lot of us, trying to engage in conversations around this issue, knowing that people have their stakes in the ground already, and that they're drawing from dramatically different sources of information to inform their perspectives on that. So it's really difficult to seek to find common ground within that context. Has anyone had any success, whether in this particular issue or in similarly divisive issues, overcoming some of those obstacles?
I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. If I'm sorry, did someone? I feel like you all would know this, but I find when I'm confronted with these kinds of things, what I'm seeing as number 2 is what's one effort you might make to facilitate bridge building amongst those who serve is to make sure that I understand the context of what they're asking me for and repeat it back to them to get them their buy-in to it. A lot of things that I have to cope with, of course, is the presentation of a middle-aged white male, and we're a lot of sensitive to it, and particularly in an organization that has a liberal tilt to it. I try to be very mindful of like, hey, there's not just this perspective, but the partisanship needs to also be, where do we have this conversation? Where can we disengage? Much like you did with the example with the video, and saying, make sure we have an understanding of one another and what we want from ourselves properly by setting establish a certain kind of boundary without creating barrier. And that's always a struggle, right? So, yeah, I completely agree with you with the partisanship going on between Palestine and Israel. It's almost like it's so convoluted and such a long exasperation of people's experiences that it's like, what I'm finding here, people are checking out. They go, I don't even want to hear it. I don't even want to discuss it. I don't even want to be a part of my static of what's going on. Whereas it is important that we discuss it, and it is important that we identify why there's constrictions going on, and if not the subject itself, what we can do better to communicate amongst ourselves is equally important, probably even more important.
Yeah, I love this, like the idea of returning this idea of like kind of making an effort to understand the context from which people are they're coming from before we make an effort to like kind of weigh opinions against each other, right? We need that context. I think it's a great point, Anthony, also you bring up that like that some of these issues are so loaded that we're not able to successfully navigate them because of people are like, I don't even want to go there. Like, I know that people are ready to fight and I'm not interested in fighting. So we're just going to pretend like this doesn't exist. And progress can't be made if we're not able to like at least have the conversation.
Yeah, it's that ostrich psychology. Like, if I don't see it, it's not happening. But if anything, that becomes more devious, because that's kind of how the system's set up, is to create that separation by ignoring it. And it's become so much so fast and so quick. Any mistake can be amplified into like a complete cancellation, if you will, and or like PC ultra autonomy. You go, well, like, wait a minute, I'm trying to understand my place in this, so I can either help create space, or I understand the space that you want me to help to create, and I don't have to be the bad guy just because we're having a dialogue. And I feel like a lot of our culture lately, without sounding like an old cranky bastard, is about trying to figure out how I can differentiate myself immediately, as opposed to collaborating and like appreciating our uniform, who we are as human beings, before we start cutting down to that 1%, 2%, 3% that makes us different. I'm not entirely sure what it is. And being in the film industry and seeing that over many years, it's like everybody wants to be a superstar and an influencer, or somehow they're ultra important. And I think if we just kind of granular say, I see you and I think you're important, I want to hear what you have to say. But then also having enough wherewithal to say, okay, I don't have to agree with you on that, but I agree to listen. And it seems so simple, but it's so hard to get people to buy into it.
Yeah.
I think that makes some great points. Bob, you're gonna share a perspective.
Yeah. I think of perception. I break it down. I use an analogy from photography into frames, filter, and focus. And so the frame is our understanding and our life experience and how we see things. And I recall working with couples. I always saw them individually first, and so I wanted to get a sense of their frames. And generally, the frames didn't overlap. And what you want to do is find a way for the frames to overlap. And sometimes only working with one person, getting them inside the other frame, allowed that person's frame to become more flexible so they could see it. It's kind of what you've been talking about. But there's another way where you look at the gap in between. And I think with my own perspective on the Israeli-Palestinian thing, the Israeli-Hamas thing, it's not Israeli-Palestinian in my mind, is you had two groups of leaders that used fear to get into power and used fear to maintain power, and essentially have created an adversarial mentality. And it's almost a natural progression on what they've done. I mean, Hamas wants to destroy Israel. Israel wants to destroy Hamas. How else could this end? And so understanding that, okay, we're getting all this messages because people want us to think certain ways, but there is a problem on both sides that needs to be understood. They're using violence to solve problems, which just simply doesn't work, and they've been using that for decades, and it's never worked over the long term. So how can we come together? How can we see this in a way that we're on the same team? And so those frames get a little bit larger when you see, okay, you're getting the same messages about fear that we are from a different perspective. And you're being taught to hate us, and we're being taught to hate you, but we don't hate each other. We don't have a reason to hate each other.
The problem is, Bob, that doesn't fit on like a bumper sticker, like what you just
Yeah, it'd be a
said,
long
right?
bumper sticker.
Hey, but it is a very nice Venn diagram, and
Yeah.
everything is better with a Venn diagram.
I love this metaphor of, what was it? Frames, filter, and focus.
Frame, filter, and focus. Filter is the emotional component. And so you want to clear the filter. You want to, and that's done through acceptance and allowing the other person's emotions to move. And when they do that, they're more open to your emotions. And then the focus is what you pay attention to. So instead of focusing on the differences and focusing on the messages we're getting that enhance those differences, we're focusing on where is some information that we can both benefit from.
See, I need a bumper sticker with frame, filter, and focus on it. Like that works for me. I think is that your own creation, Bob? Is that something?
Yeah. I just came up in the course of counseling and trying to explain how perceptions work.
Well, I think it has perfect application to media literacy and the discussions we're talking about. Not only are so many of our students like familiar with the use of cameras, right, in their media creation, but then it has like perfect metaphorical application to these points that we're making. That's great. I'm gonna use that, Bob, and I will cite you.
And the filter is a really important component. I remember working with someone who was really angry at a friend and wrote him, the bottom line is he wrote a really life-giving email to solve the conflict. And his friend read it and responded and equally really angry back. And he read the email, but totally missed it because he read it from a filter of anger. And I've seen it so many times in counseling where one person says something and the other person totally misses it. And I have to say 4 or 5 times, could you repeat that? Could you repeat that? Okay. And then finally, when they get into balance, and I think that's in many respects, the key component, at least in my experience, is you've got to be patient. You've got to be calm. You can't be open when you're pressured in a hurry, when you're trying. Okay. You can only be open when I love the frame, the first best step is a step back. Okay. Take a step back and be open. And then we can move forward.
I love these correlations we're finding between like your work as a counselor and the efforts that we're making as creators and educators. This is exactly the type of conversation we want to be having, guys. Now we are like running short on time, and so I want to make sure that we get to the last pieces of our conversation. Thank you so much for sharing these perspectives and these practices that you guys are implementing in your own kind of spheres. I want to give you one more opportunity to kind of participate in efforts that Renee and I have been making to engage with these important issues. As Renee mentioned earlier, right, her and I have been involved in Courageous Rhode Island's various programs that have included professional development and courageous conversations. But coming up at the beginning of next year, we're launching a youth media contest. Basically, as part of these initiatives, we've already developed a number of creative activities and project ideas that educators, that community members can use to make a difference in their communities, but also as means of like submitting to this contest. Let me see what I got out of this. So the contest, just so you guys are aware, runs January through April of next year. It's open to university, middle, and high school students. Types of submissions include video, audio, images, whether it's photography or graphic design, or illustration, and then written submissions in the forms of poetry or short stories or op-eds, things like that. And 16 prizes, including a $1,000 grand prize, are going to be given out to participants in this contest. Now, in order to help encourage participation on our website, Courageous Rhode Island, we actually have curriculum that corresponds with some of these different topics that we've discussed with our community over the past year or so. And for each of these themes, there is a creative expression project ideas that folks like yourself and your colleagues working in other similar spheres of community and education might use to facilitate these types of conversations we've had today, to model bridge building. But then also these projects are ones that could be submitted to this youth media contest. So for example, there's a little creative activity in this one. It includes the participants going out and doing a survey about disinformation. And then the project is a media literacy picture book in which participants are able to put together like a children's book, right, that tells the story of a child encountering disinformation and then being led by, trusted friends and parents and teachers to develop their media literacy skills to thoughtfully respond to this information, this inaccurate information. Now, we would invite all of you guys to jump on our website. If you go back to the CRI, Courageous Rhode Island website, there is a site for the Youth Media Contest. So you can find out a little bit more about what we're doing, the timeline, the procedures, things like that. We'd also invite you to reach out to us if you are interested in being involved. We are looking for folks to involve their students or their community members. We're looking for folks to be involved as judges to evaluate the submissions that we get. And we look for those to be involved to kind of spread the word about this effort that we're making, to try to use our creativity, our media literacy skills to build bridges and to address some of these really difficult challenges that we're facing. Renee, do you have anything that you want to add on at the end of this webinar?
I want to give a shout out to you. You generated such interesting creative expression ideas. And right now, Pamela is having her students make media about this work, and we're going to get to hear about that. And some of that work is going to inspire us when we meet again after the holiday break. But I'm going to give a shout out to the influencer war activity. Ben, I put it in the chat. Can you talk a little bit about how this might inspire students to think about conflict and building bridges?
For sure. Yeah. So among the activities that we created was this idea of the influencer war game. The idea is that you list 20 people whom you trust to provide you with accurate information, right? And you put them on cards. They can be people, public figures, people from your personal life, and you put each of their names on a card. And then you play. Do you guys remember this card game war where you each place down a card and the higher number wins, right?
Joe Rogan versus Oprah Winfrey.
Exactly. The goal of the game is to engage both players in dialogues about why the name on their card is trustworthy in relation specifically to the name on the other person's card. And the goal is not to determine which influencer is more trustworthy than the other, but use the game as an opportunity to spark conversation about and reflection about what we do value, why we look to certain sources and not others, right? And to then maybe come to some mutual understanding of what trust can look like across these different kind of perspectives and experiences. Just one example of the type of activity that you could do within your community and your context to spark.
What I love about it is it's high fun. And I can see some really interesting reflection happening from it, but I can also see how it might inspire a media creative activity too.
Absolutely. Yep. So that's all my content for the day. I really appreciate you folks being here and participating in the conversation. I really hope you got something out of it to bring back to your spheres of influence.
We'll be talking more about the Youth Media Contest as we move into the new year, but thank you so much for being part of this, Ben. Thank you so much for sharing these insights with us and inspiring us to think about how we can build bridges.
Yep.
Are the results of the contest, the entries going to be available to the public for us to see and possibly show in our classes? Awesome.
They are. So we are putting together a website where initially members of the community can go on and vote for their favorite entry within each category. And then those entries will then appear as part of the Courageous Rhode Island's website, so that at any point you can access them and share them with your classes.
Good, thanks. I appreciate that because I'm waiting for the Joe Rogan versus Oprah video that you and Renee are going to do as a demo.
Yeah, we're dressing up for it and everything. It's going to be great.
Okay.
Hey, thanks for joining us, you guys. Ben, thanks for a marvelous, very insightful. See how I tweeted about you? Why don't you? All right, I'm Renee Hobbs, Media Education
Thanks,
Lab.
everyone.
Hey, listen, don't just want to say one thing. If you are a glutton for punishment, you know, we are coming back. What is it? Tomorrow. Influencers on TikTok. Check out the Media Education Lab website and join